Stories of Vision Loss. This episode features Mary Tyler Moore's story, as told by her husband, Dr. Robert Levine. He shares information about the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative, with hopes that it will preserve both vision and Mary's legacy. Mary Tyler Moore captivated audiences with her graceful talent and charisma. She is an award-winning actress, producer, author, media executive, and advocate. And though her career began in the 1950s as a dancing elf in commercials for home appliances, she became a role model for independent working women. She is best known for her roles in The Dick Van Dyke Show in the 1960s.
The Dick Van Dyke Show, starring Dick Van Dyke, Larry Matthews, and Mary Tyler Moore.
And The Mary Tyler Moore Show in the 1970s, where she played the first single career woman on television, with a rich life filled with her work and a group of strong female friends.
Who can turn the world on with her smile?
She reshaped how women were portrayed on television, as she showcased a forward-thinking, fearless, yet vulnerable and feminine character who spoke her mind. Mary won 7 Emmy Awards in her career and was nominated for an Academy Award for her powerful portrayal of a grieving mother in the film Ordinary People. She also won numerous Golden Globe and People's Choice Awards. She was inducted into the TV Comedy Hall of Fame and received a special Tony Award for her role in the play Whose Life Is It Anyway?, a role in which she was the first woman to replace a man in a leading role on Broadway. Mary was the best-selling author of 2 autobiographies, After All and Growing Up Again, Life, Loves, and oh yeah, Diabetes. Mary's openness about her life with diabetes again made her a role model. She served as the international chairman of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, now called Breakthrough T1D. She advocated for research funding in front of Congress and various administrations, dedicating herself to finding cures for diabetes and its complications.
We do thank you for joining us in saving lives.
We're dealing with flesh and blood people now who feel pain, feel fear, and our obligation is to those who are here.
She helped raise billions of dollars, which has enabled scientists to discover more than 50 genes or gene regions associated with type 1 diabetes. As a result, researchers can more easily study how the disease develops and what environmental factors can affect it. Mary is a cherished figure in the hearts of many, with her enduring joy for life. And so I'll end this intro with a quote by Mary. Quote, "You can't be brave if you've only had wonderful things happen to you." End quote.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So I'm Dr. S. Robert Levine. I'm 70 years old. I live in the New York metro area. I was married to Mary Tyler Moore for over 33 years. We were together for nearly 35. She loved to dance and she loved to read. Mary started professionally as a dancer. She was a ballet dancer and she loved the dance. That was where she found her true joy. Mary was diagnosed with diabetes at age 33 in around 1970. The time we met in 1982, she already had significant complications of her diabetes, including evidence of diabetic retinal disease. And by 1986 or so, she needed what's called pan-retinal photocoagulation, which at the time was the gold standard of treatment for people like Mary with diabetic retinal disease that was advanced. It's called proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And what the procedure actually does is it burns the retina to save the retina. So it burns out, the laser burns out the peripheral retina in order to save the central vision. So for as long as possible, individuals can still read and can still drive and so forth.
Yeah. Tell me how you met Mary and a little bit about your time together.
So I was a young cardiologist in 1982, and as a young cardiologist, I took extra jobs. I had a gig as covering other doctors' practices at night and on weekends. And Mary had just been traveling in Europe with her mom and dad, and her mom had gotten sick in Paris. And so when they got home back to New York, Mary called her doctor, and his answering service referred the call to me. So Mary and I's first conversation was around her mom's respiratory illness. In any case, I persuaded her that I had to see her mom. And I did so at the Mount Sinai emergency room and took care of her, prescribed some medications, and sent her home. And 2 nights later, because her mom wanted to travel back to Los Angeles, I paid a visit at Mary's apartment to check out her mom and clear her to travel. She was fine. And when I was leaving, I said to Mary what you'd imagine a young doctor would say to any family that he was treating, which was, if you have any further concerns or questions, don't hesitate to call me. So Mary said immediately to that, is acute loneliness a good enough reason to call? And I said, and I still don't know how I came up with this, but nonetheless, I said, I can't think of a better reason to be awakened at 3 a.m. And so, in fact, a few days later at 3 a.m., Mary called me. She asked me, do you cook? I lied and said no. And then she said, well, I guess we'll have to go out to dinner. So that was, our first date was October 2nd, 1982 at the Café des Artistes in Manhattan. And we basically were together since. So we got married in November of 1983. And because I was a doctor and she was a dancer, and our wedding was basically on Thanksgiving, we had 2 turkeys on the top of our cake, one with a stethoscope around its neck and the other wearing ballet shoes. And we were married for over 33 years. And very early in our marriage, around 1986 or so, it became obvious that Mary was having a great deal of difficulty with regard to her vision. Mary was a very important advocate for diabetes research. You may know that she was the international chairman of what was then called the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, now called the Breakthrough T1D. And in that role, Mary helped raise billions of dollars, for diabetes research, with the hope that by investing in research, we could find cures for diabetes and its complications. So after she passed in 2017, I had worked with her for over 30 years, with the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation in leadership. And I chose, as a way to honor Mary, was to continue her legacy of leadership and support for diabetes research and organize what we now call the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative. We state our purpose as doing what's necessary to ensure that people with diabetes can live joyful and independent lives, free from the fear and challenges of vision loss from their diabetes. And of course, you can't do everything. So our mission is to take a position in this space to help accelerate the development of new methods to preserve and restore vision in people with diabetes. So I help create new treatments for both prevention and cure of vision loss.
Yeah, tell me more about how the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative does that. How do they go about creating more research and options?
Of course, thanks, Charlotte, for that question. Our approach at the beginning, we roadmapped the cure, and our phase 1 approach is to develop critical resources, research resources, and tools that can catalyze breakthroughs in science by eliminating barriers to progress. More specifically, what we've done in our first phase is to try and overcome 3 fundamental barriers to progress. The first barrier to progress is if you don't know what you're treating, you can't solve the problem. So you can't solve a problem that you haven't well defined. The second challenge is you can't really find cures for human disease without studying the human condition. And the third is you really can't judge your success unless you know what to measure. So as it relates to defining the disease, the current standard of the way in which diabetic retinal disease is diagnosed and its severity is assessed by experts, by ophthalmologists and retina specialists, is over 40 years old. And it only takes into consideration one aspect of diabetic retinal disease, the vascular disease of diabetic retinal disease. So we took upon ourselves a project to look at what's known about the disease and then try and identify how we can do a better job of defining it so patients can be diagnosed earlier and you can develop personalized treatments for them. That's one project that we've initiated and are making great progress on. The second barrier, as I mentioned, was you can't find cures for human disease without studying the human condition. To overcome that barrier, we've stood up at the University of Michigan Kellogg Eye Center and Caswell Diabetes Institute what's called an ocular biorepository. And that's where we collect eyes from human donors and evaluate them so that we can actually understand the course of the disease, looking at the retinal tissue and examining it in great detail, including at the molecular and cellular level. In this way, we can identify targets for new treatments, for new drug development, which can then be tested ultimately in humans and brought to market for benefit. And the last big project of our phase 1 is about knowing what to measure. And for this, again, one of the things that motivates us is the understanding that, for instance, if you look at individuals with youth onset diabetes, over 50% of them have evidence of diabetic retinal disease within 10 to 12 years of their diagnosis. That means a mean age of about 25. So young people with diabetes who've had the disease for 10 to 12 years, over 50% of them are starting to show evidence of diabetic retinal disease. And importantly, amongst those individuals, as well as all others with diabetes, our colleagues have been able to demonstrate that even without evidence on photographs of the retina or an ophthalmologic exam, even without evidence of abnormality of the retina that you can see, structural abnormality of the retina, as many as 30% of patients already have what we call functional deficits, visual field deficits. So here you have a problem of epidemic of diabetes. You have people developing diabetic retinal disease at earlier and earlier ages, and they're showing signs of vision loss even before an ophthalmologist can recognize any changes in the structure of their retina. So it's really important that we figure out, especially in these early stage disease, what's going on with the human retina and what molecular pathways are being affected and how we can design drugs to interfere with that pathology, with the disease development. Now, Charlotte, I mean, you had asked me earlier, and let me go back, if you allow, to what life is like with someone with vision loss, from diabetes.
Yeah, as a husband and as someone who has loved someone who's gone through vision loss and diabetes, how did it impact you?
Yeah, I think of myself as being a fairly competent individual with a certain set of skills and knowledge as an MD. And the truth is, facing the fact that there is someone that you love who has a progressive disease that is going to limit her life and you can do nothing about is extremely frustrating. So it's about a choice that you make, not to accept the fact there's nothing you can do about it. And even if it's not an immediate solution, to do everything that you can to find solutions for your loved one and also for all others who suffer as she does. So as a husband, it was a shared frustration, even anger, at times about the impacts of vision loss, the limits that it put on her life, the stepping forward to try and fill in wherever I possibly could to keep her, as autonomous and joyful as possible for as long as possible, but then together dedicating ourselves to finding solutions, to not accepting the status quo that this was the only outcome that was possible, progressive vision loss until blindness. And because we had the opportunity to do something about it, to do it, to step forward and do it. And that's what we're doing now to carry on her legacy through the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to honor her legacy.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. So at a certain point in the mid 90s or so, Mary stopped wanting to go out. She stopped wanting to go to galas and events because she just didn't feel comfortable, especially in low light because of her retinal disease. And then, because she was such a dynamic personality and independent spirit, she really didn't want to limit herself. But she was forced at least she was forced to always have someone with her because she started to fall and miss things. So she tripped over her dogs on occasion. She would not see a step and she would fall. On one occasion, she was shopping in Manhattan, and in this particular store, you'd go through these big glass doors and then there were steps in front of you and she didn't see the steps. So she fell down those steps.
Did she ever have any training, any blindness or low vision training?
She really wasn't the sort of person who wanted to acknowledge
Hmm.
the challenges she had. From a professional standpoint, we did our best to kind of keep it not well known, if you will, because she really wanted to continue to be able to work.
Hmm.
And she didn't want producers and directors and others to think of her as being damaged goods and not able to finish a project or being an insurance risk. So she was very, very good at accommodating. For the most part, we always had someone on her arm to guide her. And then if she was in a controlled situation, like on a stage or on location, she could block out where she was or where she needed to go, and she could manage pretty well as long as she was able to prep for it.
Did she disclose at that point, once she was on stage and, she had the gig, did she disclose anything to people around her?
She would have sidebar conversations with the director, and we'd set up scenes,
Hmm.
in such a way that there wouldn't be things in her way. If you've seen the Lifetime Achievement Award that was given by SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, in I think 2012, what you see is Dick Van Dyke doing an introduction, and then they move to a video clip, and then when they come back, the lights go up and Mary's standing at the podium.
Mary Tyler
Mm.
Moore.
Thank you so much.
The reason why she was standing at the podium as opposed to walking out to the podium was she could not see sufficiently to walk safely, from backstage to the podium.
Mm. And she never did carry a cane, did she?
No, 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 no.
Yeah.
She always, it's interesting, she was active in the guide dog movement for a while with Betty White. She supported Betty White's efforts in that area. And again, she understood the need and the importance, but she never wanted to allow herself to accept the limitation. She always wanted to remain as independent, as she could. And she had the benefit of having people around her that could guide her and help her. But she was a dancer at heart, and she was body aware. And she really didn't want to feel as if she needed a device
Mm.
to be able to sustain herself. Now, of course, if you ask, on the other hand, was she a proponent of the development of those technologies? Absolutely. Did she advise families who had children with type 1 diabetes to look into getting pumps for their kids as that technology improved? Absolutely, of course. So she was avid supporter of research technologies to aid in individuals' outcomes and potential for their future, but she just resisted for herself using those technologies for her own benefit. She really wanted to preserve her sense of her autonomy.
Yeah, that's so interesting, that duality in
Yeah.
being okay with being interdependent with the people around her rather than getting a guide dog and going out on her own.
Yeah.
So many people struggle with that adjustment to what does independence look like for me.
Of course. And again, she had the benefit of having me and having an assistant who was always with her and others that would swarm to her aid if she ever stumbled. And
Mhm.
I would urge anyone to explore early what the options are. If there's no choice from the standpoint of restoring vision, then they should be exploring whatever options there are for assist. And there are so many newer technologies that were not available when Mary was coming up that are available now that can assist. The truth is, these sorts of chronic diseases like diabetes and like vision loss for whatever etiology is, you don't really know it until you've lived it.
Mhm.
And so it's so important for people who have vision loss or are afraid of vision loss from diabetes to engage with a community of others who have the experience, who can share the little tips and tools and techniques that they use to get through their day. There's so much to learn from one another and from the stories of others, and to frankly not feel alone.
Mhm. And as we're rounding things up, I'd like to ask you to share anything to anyone out there who's experiencing diabetes, either themselves or their loved ones, if you have anything to share.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say even if you're young, make sure that you identify a skilled retina specialist, ophthalmologist, and make sure that you have periodic reevaluations. So the standard recommendations are If you have type 2 diabetes, you should have an expert ophthalmologic exam immediately as soon as you've been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And if you're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, within the first 5 years. So I think that's the first thing, is eye health is a very important thing for anyone who's been diagnosed with diabetes. I would also encourage any individual to think about, learning about whether there are clinical trials that are being conducted at their medical centers or by their doctors, and learn about whether or not they're candidates for those trials or whether it be worthwhile for them to participate in those trials, because we cannot find new solutions, new cures or preventative strategies to disease without individuals being willing to take the risk of participating in clinical trials. I would say find a group of friends, others with diabetes, with whom you can share your frustrations, your upsets, and your optimism about outlook. Get involved in a local not-for-profit. Get involved with the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative or the local chapter of Breakthrough T1D or other patient organizations through which you can gain access to resources and content, that can help you along. There are a lot of body aware issues that come to the fore with diabetes. And so it's really important that you try and find a supportive group of friends. And if you find yourself being challenged by tendencies, towards anorexia or bulimia, to get help. Because if you add anorexia and bulimia to type 1 diabetes, it can be very, very challenging. It can be a very, very big problem because the effects are additive and you can do yourself real damage. So being physically active is very important as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that piece as well.
Sure.
Yeah. So tell us how we can look up the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative and where we can find you guys.
Thanks, Charlotte. Well, you can find us at marytylermoore.org. That's our website.
Okay.
And there's a lot of information about what we're doing, about Mary. Our PSA is posted on the site. We obviously post news stories as well as important content about what diabetic retinal disease is and how people should care for themselves. And we also post a lot of scientific updates.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking with me and sharing information about the initiative and about your life and your life with Mary. Appreciate it.
Well, Charlotte, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
A big thank you to Dr. Robert Levine for sharing your experience with the beautiful Mary Tyler Moore and the Vision Initiative created in her honor that is working to research and preserve vision related to diabetic retinal diseases. We'll share information in our show notes for the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative. Thank you to MJ Jefferson for our production and creative partnership. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can buy us a coffee by visiting the website buymeacoffee.com/stories of vision loss. Or you can record an audio message to share your thoughts and help our community grow. There are links in the description of this episode for these options. And finally, thank you for listening.